Welcome to Peninsula Seniors Out and About. Today we're at the Western Museum of Flight in Torrance for one of their celebrity lectures. Let's go see what Cindy has for us today.
Welcome everyone to the Western Museum of Flight. I'm Cindy Maka, the director.
Hey, Cindy.
Thank you. Today we have been fortunate to have someone who experienced at first hand the consequences of political tampering with military tactical operations. Fortunately, he survived to tell the tale. And we're about to hear how the real events unfolded. Ladies and gentlemen, Lieutenant Colonel Don Harton.
It's really neat to be here to be able to talk to you guys and ladies. What I experienced is something very unique. I was there on the first day of the Vietnam War and there on the last day. I got 5 combat tours, 2 in B-52s, 2 in F-105s, and 1 in F-111s at the very end. And I was really hoping that one of your members would be here, a guy named Bob Ettinger. 2 photos are of him back there on that table. And he flew F-16s, and he flew the first F-16 out of the General Dynamics plant. I flew the last F-111 out of the plant. We flew it together and tapped into a KC-97 tanker over Albuquerque on its way to the boneyard. That was kind of a memorable flight, but that was Bob, and he didn't show up. So now I get to rag him all the way through this. So you can tell him that for me. Also, one time we were river rats, and we were at a Washington, D.C. reunion. We were riding from Washington, D.C. down to Udvar Hazy Air Museum in Washington, D.C., and I was sitting next to Bob, and he was telling me, you know, he says, I got a whole squadron of planes now, but I got no pilots. And I said, how do you do that? He says, it's the Global Hawk. Wow, really kind of neat. That was something else. He was a great test pilot. He was a test pilot at Edwards. I was a test pilot at General Dynamics, and we flew together on that first and last flight. And I start this meeting because he should have been here. And first and last combat missions and things like that. So I'll get into the nuts and bolts of it, but everybody is probably sitting there thinking, boy, being a test pilot, isn't that kind of dangerous? No, it's the most boring thing I ever did other than fly a desk. Think about it. You get up, you go up and you run systems. You check the system out. If it works, you turn it off. You come back and you finally, after you've checked all the systems, you sign a piece of paper and says, we buy this airplane, and now it's the Air Force's. And General Dynamics gets paid or whoever else. Well, that's what test flying is about, and I thought about that myself. Flying a B-52 as a co-pilot is the same damn thing. All you do is run systems. Well, I got out of pilot training and got to fly a B-52. Our class got nothing but B-52s, it seemed like. There were a couple of National Guard fighters and a couple of T-37 and T-33 instructor pilot slots, but most of us got many, many engines. I got 8. I think our class averaged about 6 engines per man. And I got B-52s, and I loved it. The B-52 is an awesome, awesome airplane. I mean, it's a great big Hummer. It really is. It's got 8 engines, and it was fun to fly when I got to fly it. Usually I got to run the systems. So I was there and got checked out on a crew and got put on alert, got to fly a couple of Chrome Dome missions. That's the kind where you take off and you sit there for about 30 hours and you fly up and around the Arctic Ocean, and then you fly down to China, and then you fly back to Alaska, and then you fly back home, and didn't get to sleep the whole time. Well, that got old real quick. Then we'd go on alert, and that got old real quick. 7 days on alert, nuclear alert, you don't get to do anything but sit there and study and watch TV and have a lot of fun in a lot of other ways, like playing Risk at night or listen to people talk in the library. You know all about that, right? And you sit there on alert, and that's all you do. 16, 17 days, maybe 20 days of alert per month. That's 24 hours a day. You're working, except you're really studying, and you kind of finally get to a point where you finally learn most of the stuff. And then they said, okay, you guys are going to fly iron bombs. Iron bombs are what are, steel bombs, iron bombs. They're the things they dropped on Europe in World War II. They had a bunch left over, so they said, let's try them on Vietnam. Lyndon Johnson decided, we're going to send 2 wings of B-52s over to Guam. They're going to land, refuel, and take off again after they've loaded their bombs, and we're going to fly up to the Hanoi area and overfly Hanoi at about 300 feet. That's 500 MSL, mean sea level. And we would go up over there with 30 B-52s right straight across Hanoi, pop up to 1,500 feet, and drop on the Fukien airfield. That's 1,530 large bombs. We would have wiped out Fukien. The war would have ended right there. Think about it. We could have ended the war in one combat mission. 30 B-52s, we'd have scared the hell out of everybody in Hanoi, overflying about 10 o'clock at night at 200 or 300 feet. But we didn't do that. We got to Guam, and we went in to have a meal while they were loading and refueling our planes. And I got to tell you why, is because on February 7th, 1965, the war started on a little bit in early August of 1964, when Everett Alvarez got shot down and captured. The Navy had a strike against some people, and the problem was they were killing lots of people over there. The communists were killing a whole lot of people. So they decided we better send some B-52s over there and stop this stuff. But we got over there February 7th, 1965. The Viet Cong went in and attacked our base in the highlands in the near around Pleiku, and they murdered and killed 27 of our Army Special Forces troops. 27 of them. Now, as you know, even Lyndon Johnson didn't like people killing our young men, so that's when he sent us, and that was on February 11th, 1965. We deployed. So we landed there, and our mission over Hanoi and knocking out the Fukien airfield was the first mission. That's Arc Light 1. Second mission might have been to Kep or some other airfield up there, but they didn't have any defenses at the time. Nothing. And the third mission might have been to the Lop Nor nuclear facility in northwest Xinjiang province in China. They lit off a nuclear bomb March 19th, 1965, 1 month later. We could have stopped all that, and Russia would have cheered us on. So these were the facts of the matter. How many people do you think the communists murdered, killed, shot, sent to the gulag, starved to death, or what, from the rise of the communist power in 1917 during their revolution to the fall of the Berlin Wall? Anybody got a wild guess of how many people they killed just to maintain communism? Several billion? That was a little high, but at the time there weren't that many people on Earth. Oh, 70 million? Several million. Do I hear anything more? Do I hear something higher? 175 million. The first person that's come close. It was well north of 200 million people they murdered. How many did they murder after we left the Southeast Asia theater? Anybody got a wild guess there? Cambodia, Laos, they wiped out Laos. They destroyed the Karens. They decimated the Hmong people. They're living up in Fresno now. And they killed off all the Montagnards. Think about it. They murdered somewhere between 5 and 7 million people after we left Vietnam. So, my question, those are questions that are now answered, and that is the reason we fought the Vietnam War, was to stop that kind of murderous stuff by the communists. They've done it throughout their history. So that's why we fought in Vietnam. So we went over there. Problem was, we landed in Guam, and we're all having lunch, or actually it was dinner. It was late that night, finally, in the club. For us, it was about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and we were exhausted. We left out of Sacramento and out of Barksdale, Louisiana, with 30 B-52s and a bunch of tankers that went to Kadena. And we're sitting there, can't have a beer because we're about to launch B-52s in our first combat mission. Some colonel walked into the club, and he seemed to have a handle on things, and he says, "There's been a delay. You can go on and have a beer if you want." The dining hall emptied, and we all bellied up to the bar and had one beer and then staggered home for bed, and we spent 4 months waiting. Nothing happened for 4 months except we went to the beach, we went fishing, we went snorkeling, we had beer, we played 4, 5, 6 or ship captain and crew or something to see who would have to buy that beer, and it was, like 10 cents a beer. It was pretty neat. We had 4 months of vacation. This is after, probably 16 to 18 days per month on alert, flying several days, several times, and doing Chrome Dome missions. Suddenly, we had all the time in the world. So, one day, they came to us and said, "Well, we think we're going to have to fly a mission now." Okay, is it going to be to Hanoi? No, it's going to be the Iron Triangle northwest of Saigon. Oh, that's a nothing target. So they said, okay, get ready. And we all got ready and briefed and did all the studying and did everything we had to do. And we got ready and flew that mission. Took off at 3 o'clock in the morning. 30 B-52s, 1 minute apart, 2 minutes between each cell. A cell flies, and I got to animate just a second. This is 1, this is 2, and my eyeballs are 3. A mile behind and 500 feet above. That was a standard formation for B-52s throughout the Vietnam War. And that was 3 ships make 1 cell. There were 10 cells, and we were the number 3 ship in the 3rd cell. So there was a typhoon in the area, and we said, a bunch of us lieutenants went in and said, "You don't have any timing triangles. What about the timing? If everybody gets there early or late, we can't make up or lose time." "Oh, we flew the 1,000-plane raid to Hamburg and to Schweinfurt and all these places." Okay, that's all well and good, and we love you World War II pilots, but this is Vietnam and this is now. We need some timing out there. They wouldn't put it in. So our cell, there was a typhoon in the area. It turns out it was Typhoon Dinah, the 4th largest typhoon in the history of the world that we know of. So we get over there, and we're 9 minutes early. We're sucked in by that typhoon, and we're supposed to meet our tanker on time. So you got to do a 360. Well, they screwed up at SAC headquarters, and they put all the refueling tracks, 5 of them, down the South China Sea, 25 miles apart. The rules said 50 miles apart minimum, right? They put them 25 miles apart. So I got out of the seat and went downstairs to take my nervous pre-refueling leak, which we all did. And I got back in, and the pilot got out, and he went downstairs to do the same. And when he got back in, before he did, lead turned left. 2 followed him, and I said, "Hey, radar, what are they doing? Are they thinking about doing a 360 to lose the 9 minutes? We're early?" He says, "Roger, keep your eyeballs open." Eyeballs open. My eyeballs were about this big at the time. And I looked, and I strapped myself in, double-checked the pins were out, did everything I had to do. Pilot got in, he was madder than anything. And he said a few cuss words that in my book, I mentioned what he said, but I saved one word I didn't want his kids to see. And we were just upset, because the B-52 does a 360-degree turn, takes 25 miles diameter to do it. And I said to the radar, I said, if there's another cell following us and a track just south of us, we're going to meet them head on. Raj, keep your eyeballs open. Well, middle of the night is about 7 o'clock in the morning Guam time, but it's still about 4 o'clock in the morning over in the Philippines. And we're right out about 150 miles northwest of Manila in the South China Sea. And I look up halfway through the turn, and here comes a B-52 directly at me, head on. And it's 11, we calculated this later, it was 1,100 miles an hour closing speed, and had about 2 seconds before it hit. And I've always thought, you know, if I only could have had 30 seconds to look into the future. I've been thinking this for, 50 years nearly. I could have pulled that plane up, even if the pilot had taken it back, and missed that other plane. But what happened, and I'm going to put the mic down. We came together like this, and he was in a slight dive. I looked up, and here came a drop tank. 18,000 pounds of gas going to hit me right in the face. I saw the one light, it split into two, then I saw this tanker, or this bomber up here and another bomber down there, and they just seemed to come right at us. Here, I'll get over here. And I thought, oh my God, I went through all the things that you go through if you got cancer for 5 years and you die. I denied it. I was mad as hell. I went through denial and everything you could think of, all in a matter of a couple of microseconds. And this tank just came in, and I saw this great big shape coming at me, and you know, that quick, from about 2 miles out, and it just slowly slid under, very slowly slid under our cockpit. And that great big tail very slowly slid by here. That's how fast the mind works when if you're going to die in a head-on accident on a car out on the freeway, you're going to live through it for about a week till it actually happens. But that tail went slowly sliding by at 1,100 miles an hour, and I thought, whew, we missed. Whoop, got to recalculate. If their drop tank nearly hit me in the face, our drop tank's going to hit them in the tail, and that's what happened. There was an explosion they saw in several different directions, 200 miles away, which blew our right wing off, and everything upstairs went black. And I thought we still had a wing. I thought we just lost the tip end of it. But it blew our right wing off, and we went down just like that. And the other plane went into a spin because it lost its tail. So we're going down, the other plane went down, and I said, okay, it's time to eject. So I sat up. I tried to fly the plane for a little bit. Couldn't even see the attitude indicator. I could barely see the throttles, and I didn't know what happened to the pilot. But I said, okay, somebody ejected, and the place fogged up. And so I sat up straight, and I said, this is a once-in-a-lifetime thing, and I pulled on both handles. The left handle came up, the right handle wouldn't budge. I know I'd checked the pins, so I squeezed the left handle, and nothing happened. I squeezed it again, and nothing happened. I pulled up on the right handle several more times. Nothing happened. I thought we were flying straight and level. We were going straight down. So I finally turned my head, looked down, and like this, I pulled on that handle and squeezed it, and it fired with my head in this position. About a 5-pound helmet on my head, and it broke my neck, and I didn't know it. But for 49 years plus, I have gone with a broken neck. And about 6 months ago, I found a chiropractor that found, here we go, my atlas vertebrae was tilted and twisted like that. And he finally fixed it. And I grew a half an inch. And I used to pop my neck like this all the time. I don't have to do that anymore. He fixed it. But the VA wouldn't give me disability. They've called me a liar for being in this crash. This is the VA. And finally, Eric Shinsecki's roommate at West Point was sitting with me at dinner about 2 years ago, heard my story, and he said, oh, wow. He said, that's kind of a neat story. He says, you get anything from the VA? And I said, no, I have never received a penny. So the next morning they called me and said, we've readjusted. He called Eric Shinseki, who used to be the head of the VA. And apparently Shinseki called Reno and said, fix this guy up. So they said, you were still never in a crash, you're still lying about that, but you're crazy as hell, so we're going to give you some money for post-traumatic stress. but nothing to pay back from way back when. But that's the VA. What do you do with them, huh? So I got my neck fixed. But anyway, going back to the story, I ejected and I looked, I felt myself go out. I watched my head, kind of tilted like this as I watched that hatch fall away. And the next thing I knew, I was out in the slipstream, and I felt myself going backwards like this, and just then the plane and the bombs and everything else blew up. My left leg was pulled out of socket, and my left calf was pulverized. And I still have pain in both of them. And so I kind of sensed that big tail going by, and just after it got past, boom, and the seat itself protected me from getting blown to bits. So next thing I know, the chute kind of pops open real soft, and I bang, and I'm sitting there floating and looking around, and I look down, and the fires all over the ocean. There were 2 B-52s on the water with 500,000 pounds of gas burning, and 102 bombs had blown up, plus these 2 planes. And it reminded me of Rome burning. I said, my God, Rome is burning down there. And I'm alone in this little parachute. I looked around to see if there were other people, and I saw a parachute right back over here, so I twisted my parachute around to say hi and shout at him, but the parachute kept twisting. Wait a minute, and it just kept twisting. I did everything I could to get it to turn back, and finally it did. I said, I'm not going to screw with this anymore. But then I looked down, and these fires had created a kind of not a mushroom cloud, but a column of hot air rising up, and it's coming straight at me. And I thought, oh my God, now what am I going to do? And this stuff came up and rushed right beside me, and it knocked the parachute into a cattywampus thing, and I go swinging, and I'm looking down at the fires and into the bowl of my parachute, wondering, one more swing, and I'm going to land in my parachute, and then I'm going to fall like Icarus all the way to the ocean. And I thought, what am I going to do now? And I swear to God, I don't know why these things come to mind, but the law of conservation of angular momentum from college physics came into my mind, and I says, pop the life raft. I did. The life raft came out, the survival kit came out, bang, I stabilized, and I said, I'm not going to screw with this parachute ever again. That was twice it tried to kill me. I had 2 more times to go. So I'm coming down, and I said, dear Lord, I said, please save my butt. And he said, I swear, I know it had to be in my mind, but it's the only time God ever talked to me. And he said, save it yourself. I want to see how you're going to handle this situation. Think about that. You go to the pearly gates, and it's what you did here on earth, and it's not what you're going to ask. I want a Cadillac car for Christmas. I want a mink coat for my wife. It doesn't work that way. So I'm coming down, and I think, if I could only just live my life out here in this parachute. I don't want to hit that ocean. And by then, the fires were going out. I was in the chute. I ejected apparently about 15,000. We hit at about 30,000. So I'm looking down, and it's getting closer, and the fires are gone, but their waves were gigantic. And I found out recently that they were 80 feet high. 80 feet high. That's higher than this hangar by twice, easy. And I'm sitting there thinking, I'm going to be in that pretty soon. And it was all glowing turquoise with white caps on top, being blown right across. So I thought, look out, don't peek, look out, don't peek, look straight ahead, don't peek. That was tough. I peeked, and then I hit. And my brother-in-law, about a year before, down at Seal Beach, not far from here, set the world speed record on a water ski, on a single ski, and he owned the world speed record for about 3 hours one afternoon. I broke it. Hit the water, and kind of zam, went sideways. The typhoon winds, 125, 140 knots, something like that. And I was going like mad. So I'm rolling over and rolling over, and I'm swallowing water, and I finally got on my back and held my feet out. And that kind of stabilized me on my back. So then I tried to release these new hook rings, and the Air Force, in their infinite wisdom, didn't have the parachute shop do that. They wanted us pilots to do it 10 times before each mission for 10 missions, and that'll loosen these things up. Well, I took the clasp down, and I had these 2 rings, and I pulled and pulled and pulled. I couldn't release that thing. Both hands in my right ring, and I finally released it, and it whipped free like a bullwhip, and I stopped dead in the water. And I'm still attached over here, but I was too busy to think about something else, because it's, hey, how about surviving? I saw the life raft, I swam over to it, I was tied to it, and I got in. I pulled in my Arctic survival kit in the South China Sea in summer, and I read through on how to survive on the Arctic tundra and what you should be eating up there and what you should be doing to keep warm. And I thought, we've been here 4 months in Guam, and they haven't changed these survival kits, so it was a joke. So I'm in the life raft, and I pull out this square thing about an inch thick and about a foot square, and I look at it, and it says 1 each Arctic survival sleeping bag. I put it on the wave, and it went sliding down right into the water, down at the bottom of a wave. And that's the other thing. Now imagine you're here, and 10 seconds later you're up there, and then 10 seconds later you're back down here. 10 seconds later you're up there, and this gets real monotonous and real sickening. So I'm sitting there going through all this stuff, and I pulled out a little gun. It was a Hornet rifle. It's a .22. And what am I going to do, shoot a polar bear with this thing? So I put it together, and I thought, nope. I just dropped it into the water. And I got out these cards that showed me all the good plants to eat and the things I could do and all the bad things you should not eat in the Arctic. I said, my gosh, I'm 8,000 miles from the Arctic. What am I going to do with this stuff? I tossed them, and a little while later, I'm going up, and then bam, there was nothing left of the life raft. The survival kit, the life raft had deflated. And I didn't realize it, and I was paying attention to everything else in the book, but what was really important. And it flipped me, and I went underwater. Now remember, a parachute is still attached, and a parachute can begin to weigh upwards of a ton, I think. It's something like a ton within minutes after being soaked, and I was underwater and going down fast. Now, one thing I had done was I double-tied myself to the raft. The survival kit and the parachute dragged me under, and I'm way under. Now, down here, right there in the middle of the thigh, is a little orange knife, and it's got a hook blade on it. And I pulled that thing out, and I tried to cut the parachute cords here because I could feel them. And it wasn't working, so I had a switchblade on the other side. I flipped it, and I started slicing, and of course, I still have scars on my fingers from that. But I sliced that parachute off, and it went away, and of course, I sliced the survival kit, and it went away. And I popped to the top, and I still had my boots on. I don't know how I made it up to the top again. And I saw the life raft there, and I wadded it up, and it kind of was about the same size as a basketball. And I thought, oh, at least I can breathe. But then I got mad. I got mad at God. I got mad at myself. I got especially mad at SAC, and I was livid with LBJ. I got up there, I put that thing, and I found the little blowhole, the little blow tube thing, and I pushed in on that, and I blew that thing up, and I squeezed it shut, and nobody had done that, which they're supposed to do in the parachute shop. And I got into the life raft, and that's all I had left. That, and I take it back. I had my .38, a little pistol, and I had my helmet. And why I wanted to keep that helmet, I don't know. I still don't know. But I had the helmet, and I had the .38, and I had my life raft, and I had nothing else, and I had hope. But I was losing it. What am I going to do now? And so I just sat there, and I looked up, and you come up on a wave, and you take a look at what's all around you, and then you go back down. Now it's dark, still dark, but it was glowing. The ocean was a turquoise blue from the plankton, I imagine, I found out later. And I come up and I looked, and through this maelstrom is an orange and a black ship about, maybe half a mile less away, maybe a quarter mile away, just north of me. I could tell which way it was north, just sensing it. And I looked, and there's a ship. I said, I must be dreaming. I went back down, and I looked for a flare. I looked for a radio. It all had broken off, and everything had gone away with the survival kit. There was nothing in it that was worthwhile. They put that on the backside of it, and it broke off in the ejection. All the signaling devices, except the mirror. I still had a mirror. And I come up and I look at that thing, and how can I get a hold of it? I can't wave. They wouldn't see me. They didn't care. They were all inside drinking coffee. They were bouncing up and down and carrying on. And then I watched it go clear over here, and I looked, and there was a white ship coming this way. I thought, I know I'm hallucinating now. I could just forget it. And I went down, and I just kind of relaxed, and I bobbed up, and I watched, and I thought, they're going to have a mid-ship collision, or mid-ocean collision with the ships, like our mid-air collision up there, all in the same thing, and then there's going to be survivors out here with me, and they're going to want my one-man life raft. Now, this thing was smaller than the top of this podium. It was about a foot wide and about a foot and a half long. That was the inside surface of it, and that's big enough for my butt now. And that was about it. But I watched, and this white ship came along, and there was flares going off just over here. So I knew someone was over there, somebody that I saw when I had ejected, and I turned around before my parachute wrapped up. And I'm looking at that, and I thought, oh, wow. I said, somebody else is alive. Maybe I'm not hallucinating. And the white ship kept on going. A little while later, a tanker overflew that. Eric Heilberg was his name. He was a Mather tanker pilot. He overflew that ship, and he said he dropped gas from his probe, from his not probe and drogue, it was the boom. He dropped gas all over that white ship, trying to get their attention. They wouldn't come up on their emergency frequencies, and he dropped gas on top of them. He said, man, if I'd had a match, I'd have thrown it out and lit him. But that didn't work either. So they went around, and finally the sun was rising over here. That's how I could tell it was north for sure. And the waves were starting to die down a lot. And that way's east, that way's north, and the white ship's gone, and the orange and black ship is gone. So I sat there and I waited. And then there was a tanker, went right over the top of me with a roar about 200 feet. And I'll tell you, it was awesome. When they're going across at full speed, and you got a big plane doing it, it gets your attention. He went right across me. He went out and did a teardrop and came back, and he was right about here, and I could see people in the big open doorway there, their cargo door, and they threw out a 20-man life raft. I went down, I came back up, and it was gone. Years later, he asked me, he says, why didn't you just swim over to it? He said it was only a couple of 100 yards away. I said, I never saw it again. Never saw it, didn't know which direction exactly it was. I did try to paddle over a little bit, but the waves were still too big. So anyway, finally the waves are dying down, and I heard a and I looked, and I could see a little seaplane way off, 5 or 6, 8 miles away, going around that area down there to the southwest. And then he disappeared. And then I heard him again about 20 minutes later, and he was right over there. And I nearly jumped out of my skin. I grabbed my gun, I poured the water out of it, and I went bam, bam, bam. You know, I was going to stand up and do that, but I figured the life raft wouldn't hold me. So I fired the gun, and then he didn't even hear that, of course, the waves and the wind. But the waves were about, by this time, 8 to 10 feet high, so they died down a lot. The typhoon was a killer. It went up into Taiwan and China and killed a lot of people. And anyway, he finally taxied over to me, and he came around, and he headed out that way, and then he backed up. And I could see that propeller coming right at me, and I was still bouncing up and down in the waves, and I said, there ain't no way I'm going to let him chop me into fish bait. So I saw on the pontoon on the side of it was a tie-down ring. I saw that on this pontoon under his wing. I leapt for that, and I grabbed onto that, and I wasn't going to let go. they had to send a PJ, a parajumper, over to pull me off of it. And I'm holding onto this thing happy that you can fly off. I'll hang onto this all the way back to Clark or wherever you came from. So he finally, suddenly this kid popped out of the ocean. I said, "Are you Neptune?" Now you got to understand, I was crazy with hallucinations and everything else by this time. And I thought he was Neptune. I said, "What are you doing here?" And he says, "Lieutenant, let go of that." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because I'll pull you over. See that door right back there? I'll pull you over to the door and we can get in the cockpit and we'll dry you off." That sounds good, because I was nearly frozen to death in the winds and the wind chill there in the South China Sea, even though it was summertime. So they pulled me in, and I sat in there, and there was one guy already rescued, a radar navigator on the other plane. And Chuck Anderman was his name, and I'm saying, "Who are you, and what crew are you on?" And he goes, well, he couldn't talk, neither could I. He couldn't understand me, and I couldn't understand him. So they took my flight suit off, and they popped my life raft and threw it back in the water, and I said, "I wanted to save that." They didn't. "We don't want to rescue it again." So they destroyed the life raft. But they wrapped me in a blanket, cut a Mae West in half, and I remember I was going up and down and up and down. I was so seasick. I'd already vomited several till I couldn't do it anymore. And Jay Collier was my navigator, and Jim Herbs was my electronic warfare officer. And Jim was very fastidious. He very carefully barfed into his life raft because we were all really, really sick for days. Jay very carefully barfed outside the life raft. I saw a shark out there, and I didn't care. I was so sick, I just went all over my shoulder, because the next wave washed it off anyway. So we got into the plane, and they cut a Mae West in half and said, "Here, barf into this." And here I am, smiling, happiest guy in the world, barfing into a Mae West. I thought, this is wonderful. This is going to be great. And then we saw Jay Collier, and then we picked up Jim Herbs. So we had 4 of us alive, and then they said, "Let's get out of here. It's time to leave." And I said, "I think it's about right," because I looked down right here, and there was a red emergency bilge, and it popped up and water flowed into the cabin. And I looked at the PJ and I said, "Are we going to sink?" And he said, "Yeah, so we're going to try to take off instead." I said, "Oh, okay." And I'm sitting there, "Oh, this is really wonderful. Let's take off and get out of this place." So we're looking at that thing, and he took off and he hit these waves. They were about 8 or 10 feet high. It was real hard. What he'd done was, when he landed in them, he cracked the hull, and it was filled with water by this time. Well, we took off, and we hit these waves. We took off about 6 times, and bam, bam. Finally, we got airborne one time, and it went, and it crashed. And it was a worse actual crash than the B-52 midair. So we're going to sink, and we're going to die. And I said, "You popped my life raft, and I can't deal with this anymore." So then he said, "All right." I looked out the window, and there was that orange and black ship. They sent over a canoe. It was a Norwegian freighter named the Argo. A canoe, and I swear to God, it wasn't much wider than this podium, and it was about as long as from here to the camera. And they told us to get in it, and there was a pilot up in the front seat. He was in the IP jump seat, and I said, "Hey, isn't Joe Robertson going to come with us?" And PJ looked at me and said, "No, Captain Robertson is dead." That's when it hit me. I got into the canoe, and I was devastated. I realized we'd lost people, and we probably weren't going to get any back. We didn't. 8 guys were killed. So they rowed us over to the Norwegian freighter, and they threw a rope down the side. "Can't you throw a ladder or something for us to No, you can climb up with a rope." So I was really weak, but I walked up that rope. They at least tied it around Colonel Anderman, because he was injured pretty badly. And we finally got up into the Norwegian freighter, and they sent over from a Navy ship, the Point Defiance, that they sent over a launch to pick us up, They finally picked us up, and we finally got over to a Navy ship, and the first thing they were always doing was asking our names and serial numbers. And we told them all this stuff, and it was, okay, yeah, you got all the answers there, that's enough. And finally, we didn't eat for about 3 days. We could eat a little, drink a little bit of broth, and that was about it. It was just so sickening to even think about. So anyway, they got us back and took us back to Clark Air Base. Actually, we went to Subic Bay, drove us around to QB Point, and flew us up to Clark and put us in a hospital and wouldn't let us talk to anybody. SAC, does anybody remember SAC? That's how they worked. So we couldn't talk to anybody for a couple of days, and then they flew us back to Guam, and we were home, and we had to go through the briefings, and we had to buy the parachute shop a bottle of booze. And I bought the cheapest booze I could find. They hadn't done their job, period. So we got back and finally lived and survived. But what it did to me inside was something fierce. Post-traumatic stress I've got. I got 5 dogs. Found out that dogs are the best thing you can have for post-traumatic stress. My dad, I got home and my dad said, he said, you know, you can talk for 60 hours about, I flew 5 combat tours, 2 in F-105s, 2 in the B-52, and then another one at the end of the war in F-111s, and those are whole other stories. But Dad said you could probably talk for 60 hours nonstop without saying the same thing twice. And I said, well, that's nothing. My ex-wife could talk for 60 hours and not say anything. So that's not true. I just had to put that in there, ladies. But it was something I could not talk about for many, many years, and then finally I could think about it a little bit. And each of these speeches I give, I cannot think about it. I can only get up here and tell you what's happening and what is in my brain at the time, because I can't review this. It's just impossible. I wrote this book, and in that I was able to put some of these things down, and it took me 35 years to write the book. So it's all called procrastination. That worked for me. There's a lot more to it, and a lot more exciting stories in F-105s and F-111s, but I'd rather just leave it at that and have you ask me any questions you want, B-52s or anything about the crash or whatever. The question was, did I fly any more ArcLight missions? And I said, yes, I flew another tour, so I wound up with 30 and a half missions in ArcLight in the B-52. Then I went on and flew 161. Like I said, I had post-traumatic stress and survivor's guilt, like you don't know what survivor's guilt is, with 80 of your closest buddies dying. So I got transferred to F-105s, and I flew 161 missions in F-105s till they finally said, you cannot fly any more of these, you're going to leave now. So I did. They sent me home against my will. Later I got into F-105s, F-111s, and I flew a tour in F-111s, got 30 missions in the 111, and that was the very end of the war during Linebacker. Was I at Nellis? Yes, I was at Nellis, and I'm there now. That's where I learned how to fly the F-105 and the F-111, and that's where I flew the F-111 for about 5 years there. Then I went from there to General Dynamics. Oh, and back on the table there, your friend and mine, Bob Ettinger, we flew the first F-16, he flew it, I flew the last F-111, and we refueled with the last KC-97 out of going to the boneyard, and we had a good time doing that. I think I told you that earlier, but it was 5 combat tours I actually flew, and I loved every minute of it, except for the first mission. His question, is it my opinion that had we used the B-52 like we should have, like they did in B-17s and 24s in Germany, that the war would have been over in '65. With one mission, I wrote this in the book, with that one B-52 mission, had we hit the Fukien airfield, the war would have been over before it got started. They didn't have any defenses. They built in May of 1965, they started building SAM sites, 2 SAM sites up there. And on July 27th, 1965, we sent 2 wings of F-105s after those SAM sites. And in 1 minute, 47 seconds, we lost 6 F-105s, 3 killed, 2 captured, and 1 rescued. When you fight a war, is it my opinion, when you fight a war, go in and fight the war. When a politician tells you to go fight a war, you tell him, bug out. We'll fight the war, don't even talk to us. You tell us what you want, we'll go do it. That's the only way to fight a war. If you're not going to fight it that way, you're going to lose. Vietnam went on for 8 years, Afghanistan went on for, 10 or 12 now. You cannot fight the way the politicians want you to fight. If you're going to fight, do it. If you're going to bomb them well. Oh, and on linebacker too, the B-52s did not carpet bomb Hanoi. They hit 96 Joint Chiefs of Staff priority targets, wiped them all out. I was flying F-111s there then, and we supported the B-52s by keeping the MiGs down and bombing the airfields just before the B-52s came in. But the politicians wanted it done a certain way. That means 130 B-52s, one after the other, and they could see us. They had night optics and stuff. They had all kinds of Russian equipment there. They started shooting them down without being able to see them. And some guy told me here earlier today, they could see that with those optics, they could see the pilots in the cockpit with the lights. They could see them lighting cigarettes. Hey, if you're going to fight a war, fight it. Leave the politicians out of it. But every president we've had from then till now think they're generals, and they can't resist. They got to get their mitts into the thing. Any more questions? Got one back in the back. He's asking, how do you land a B-52 in a crosswind? They got these 4 trucks that are headed straight down. The co-pilot's big job on landing is to make sure they're aligned with the runway. And you fly sideways down the approach. If the wind is coming from the left, you fly like this. And you line the trucks up that way. So they're going straight down the runway. And my biggest fear was lining them backwards, and if you're going this way, you got them turned out this way. You could be screwy wampus around the runway. But we checked it every time and double and triple checked it. So you're coming down, you actually land this thing sideways. It's a weird, weird feeling in a good crosswind. Oh, got one over here. What is the approximate takeoff distance with a fully loaded B-52? Well, at night going over the end of that cliff in Guam, it felt like it took the whole thing, and there's a 600-foot drop-off right there. And it was usually about 8,500 feet. It's a 12,000-foot runway, as I recall. It's about an 8, and then it lifts off tail first. Yeah, it's a weird, B-52 is a weird plane, but it's going to be around longer than I am. And I was able to wreck 2 of them. Oh, by the way, according to German rules, for each engine you shoot down, you get credited for 1 kill. During this one combat mission, I got 2 B-52s and an SA-16. And I wasn't doing any of the flying. That's 18 engines. I'm America's only living triple ace enemy. But I went through stead survival and with a guy named Mike Rooney. And we were truck mates together, tent mates together. We got chased around the northern Sierra Nevadas for a week together up in the high Sierra. We drove out to Wichita together for nuclear weapons school, drove back to Castle to check out in the B-52 together. Years later, we checked out in the F-111 at Nellis together. He took my job at Upper Hayford years later, but he was the co-pilot of that plane over Palomares, Spain, that had a midair with a tanker and dropped into the Med and lost a couple of bombs into the Mediterranean that we had a real problem getting hold of. Now, Mike and I, and he got shot down in Vietnam in a bird dog. Now, you add that up, and he got something like, let's see, between the 2 of us, while we were first lieutenants, we were able to destroy 3 B-52s, a KC-135, an SA-16, and an O-1 bird dog. And Mike was the only one doing any flying, and that was in the bird dog. That's a pretty significant record. Anyway, this is a book I wrote, Arclight 1. Describes the first Arclight mission, why we got into Vietnam, what we did on this mission, And there were 60 incidents about survival there. And I only talked about a few of them, but there's all kinds of interesting things in here. People have said it's a good book, and it's well written, and I'll tell you why. It took me 35 years to write it, and the reason is because I procrastinated all the time. And I'd sit there, and I finally learned how to write, because I took writing classes and photography classes and acting classes, and I did all kinds of stuff rather than get my head into this. And I've got another book I'm doing the same thing with. It's halfway done and has been for years, but I'll get it done pretty soon. I've got 2 more books, actually. Combat High is my F-105 combat experience, and it's because when I came home from that tour, I was so high on adrenaline that it took me about 6 months to finally get off the adrenaline. Then I got another book of basically all the facts are there, but it's Whispering Death about the F-111 combat experience. And we just had an F-111 reunion at Nellis in Las Vegas, and I met all the guys again. They said, "When are you going to do that damn book?" And I said, "I got to do it pretty soon, but I don't know when." But he wants me to tell you about the terrain following radar problem we had. We lost a bunch of F-111s. We lost 3 of them on their 6-plane deployment in 1968 during Harvest Reaper. 2 of them went down and just disappeared. The other one, Joe Hodges and Sandy Marquardt, just punched out, and they called it a tube of sealant. How do you say BS in real language? No tube of sealant. There was no problem with that, but the politicians wanted to cover this up because the F-111 was truly an outstanding airplane. But they didn't want the people to know it. But it had this controversial swing wing thing. We never had a problem with the swing wings, not one problem in the whole time. How do I know this? I was the safety officer there. And I was checking out to go, and I'd studied, we lost a plane in the northern mountains of Nevada. Lost a couple of, well, one was a good friend, Bill Fushlow, and Bob Job. They both disappeared. And they didn't find them for about 6 months. And then they found them, and both accident boards found, pilot error. What? No pilot error. I studied them, and the auto terrain following switch was an auto TF, and selected 500 feet and all kinds of things. I said, and they classified it secret at the time. And my secretary was beside herself because she had to write a report on it every 6 months to keep both accident reports in the safe. And then as soon as I left the safety office, she destroyed them. But here's what happened. We got ready to go to, I was on my way to Upper Hayford, England. I promised my wife this, and suddenly we got notification, we're going to Talk Lee. We're going to put the F-111 into some real combat. I said, oh God, I can't go to Upper Hayford. I've got to go to Talk Lee because I know what the problem is. And I'd studied this thing for about 6 months. It was an electronic problem with a tie-in between a terrain following radar and a radar altimeter. And when the TFR sees, it's got a pencil beam out there that looks out to about 10 miles, and if it sees this, it pulls the plane up and flies over it at whatever altitude you select, anywhere from 200 to 1,000 feet, hard, medium, or soft ride. And it gives you at least 50-foot clearance on either side of the wingtips. So that going down a canyon is pretty tough, but it's kind of interesting to fly at night at 200 feet and 500 knots. So you're flying along. Problem is when you see a sand-filled dry lake, or you go from the beach over the ocean, or into a snow-filled saddleback, or any number of things like that, or even into a rough thunderstorm, especially those in Southeast Asia. So we got over there, and I was airborne spare for both squadron deployments, and 429th and 430th squadrons, and we got halfway to Hawaii, turned around and came back. Then we got on a 707. My navigator said, he said, I got 2 flasks here. Which do you want? One's rum, one's whiskey. I said, give me the rum. So we took off and went to Anchorage, had green eggs and ham on the way because it was midnight. Got to Anchorage on the way to Tokyo, to Yokota, green eggs and ham on the way there. By the time we got there and going to Utapao, green eggs and ham. We were sick of green eggs and ham, but the rum sure tasted good. And we got there, and we'd already lost an airplane. My old boss and my best buddy, Lefty Brett, and Bill Coltman, they had already disappeared. And then my navigator that I flew over with, he got crewed with another guy, and they went out on a special mission, just an add-on, and they disappeared. And we lost one up in northern, right around Hanoi, and they just disappeared. And I finally got tired of this. I had breakfast with a guy named Ron Stafford and Chuck Caffarelli one morning, and we're having breakfast there at the same table, my navigator and I. And we all four went out to fly, and we came back and they didn't. And it just kind of pissed me off. So nobody was reading my reports because I was a safety officer and investigating these things. And I told everybody, this is what's happening, and nobody was paying attention. So I addressed the president. And I sent a copy of that loss report of Stafford and Caffarelli to the White House. And what they had done was they named streets after him around the Nellis Hospital in Las Vegas. So here is Stafford and Caffarelli Street, but they're disappeared. About 7 days after they disappeared, their wreckage washed up on the beach just north of Hue, South Vietnam. I knew where they went in, and what they did was they hit the sea and just went right on in. And you don't even feel it. The first thing you know is you hit and you're done. And at 480 knots, that's going to kill you for sure. So I sent a copy to the White House, and the next thing you know, 10 days later, there was a 4-star general came in and literally tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Come with me." We went into the wing commander's anteroom, and he said, "Son, and I quote this, 'Son, you're in deep shit.'" I said, "I don't care, sir. I'd rather lose my career than another F-111 and some buddies." And he said, "Well, tell me about it." So I told him the tie-in between this and that, and I went through all the electronics, and we did this and compared that, and da-da-da-da-da-da, and tap danced this. And turns out, he said, "Son, I think you're right." He started making phone calls, sending messages. We had a fix for this called the 996 mod, TCTO-1 F-111-996, that fixed the problem in the F-111. They put it into the B-52, the B-1, the B-2, the F-18, every plane we got, and they can all fly low level now at 200 feet if they want, at 500 knots, and we haven't lost a one of them since that day. Well, folks, I really want to thank you for having me here, and I enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you for watching Peninsula Seniors Out and About here at the Western Museum of Flight in Torrance. I'm Betty Wheaton. I'll see you next time.